Right. Okay, good morning, and welcome to today's session. Today, hopefully, we are in our last week, and this week we are really diving now, talking more about the ICS documentation, your records, and everything, which Brian will be taking us through. So, in a minute, let me run through the program that we have for today. Like I've welcomed everybody, introducing, trying to tell us that this week we are going to be specifically talking about the ICS requirement as it applies to the new EU regulation. And then if there's any outstanding question from Module 2, Module 1, yes, once I finish talking, jump in and then ask your questions or clarify any issue. Then Brian will be taking us through a question and answer session on clarification. Once we finish ICS requirements and organization and staff set up, we will have a discussion and clarification of questions. Then we look at the core ICS procedures, the documents, the records. What are the things that have changed? What are the things you need to add to what you used to do? And also after that, we have a question and answer. And then we look at what our assignments will look like for this week, and reminding us over and over again that this is the last week, and by Friday we'll be calling it a good session with everyone. So without wasting more time, I will hand over to Brian, and I'll stop sharing. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you so much. Let me try to get my screen up as well. I always have so many windows open that I have to. Okay, I hope you can see my screen. I'll just put it in presenter mode.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Good. Yeah.
Great. Yes, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. So exciting to be in the last week of our session. And as Olaomi said, we're gonna look at the third and last module of our training, which is about the internal control system, new requirements according to the new EU regulation. I mean, as you hear, a lot is really hasn't changed, but there are some specific parts that you need to pay some attention to. So here we are, if you remember where we started from. So module 1, we looked at the group of operators as a new definition in the new EU regulation. We looked at module 2, which Olaomi took us through last week around the organic production rules. And module 3, we are looking at the ICS requirements. As you realize, all of them are building onto each other. So it's kind of a reminder that, it's all put together, will form what we have to change in the way we manage our ICS. So today, already Olaomi has mentioned, we basically have two main sessions. So I'll speak about the first, which is around structure. How should the ICS look like? Records. So maybe let's start with a more of an overview. So when you look at the new regulation, it really emphasizes some key points of the ICS, and this is compared to before, these are regulated. So when you talk about ICS procedures, it's part of the regulation. So meaning it's mandatory, we have to comply. Talk about the documents, they're also in the regulation. Previously, a lot of it was subject to how what we thought would be required to run a good ICS. But now, from all that learning, and I imagine the people who designed the new regulation are people who have worked with ICS, so they could pull in all these pieces into the regulation itself. Some roles are defined clearly in the regulation. Internal inspections are clearly speculated how it should look like, managing of non-compliances, traceability and product flow, and training. All these pieces, as you see them on the screen, are part of the regulation. So we are going to look at, what is mentioned in these different parts. And of course, all these are defined in some cases, differently, based on the ICS you're running. But what we are interested in is to see whether what you have complies to the requirements as put in the regulation. Normally, for some of you that have more than one certification, you always design one ICS for all the different certifications that you have. For groups that are fair trade, at the same time they're running maybe Rainforest Alliance or the others, they could actually design one ICS to meet the requirements of all different standards. There is flexibility in this new regulation that you can still do that, so long as the requirement of the new EU regulation are complied with, especially when we're talking about group size, because other standards are silent on how big the size should be or who should be a member. So long as the individual members of your ICS and the number of them comply with the requirements, which we covered in Module 1, then it's fine. You can still continue with your one ICS that covers all the different standards that you're working with. And of course, yeah, also a few other requirements as I'll mention, but it's okay. It's not that if you have multiple standards that you should have different ICSs. No, that is still tenable in this new regulation. So let's look at the first part, which I mentioned, the structure. So, I mean, this is a general principle that we should have a well-qualified ICS management team. And now this is in Article 36.1H, which clearly I didn't mention that the ICS needs a well-qualified team, to ensure the organic integrity of the products. The question will say, what is a well-qualified team? That is also defined, and we are going to see that. So the group of operators needs to appoint at least an ICS manager and one or more competent ICS inspectors who may be members of the group. But the positions have to be different. I remember somebody asked, and I think this was, from, was it from Gloria, who asked whether a member of the group of operators could be the ICS manager. We are going to see that, when we see clearly the roles of the ICS manager, then we shall see whether it is possible that a member can actually be the ICS manager. But obviously, the ICS manager cannot be the ICS inspector. So we have to be a group, one or more ICS inspectors, and then the ICS manager separately. And each one of them, the roles are clearly defined according to this new regulation. And we're going to see that. So, like I said, clearly defined roles. What does an ICS manager do? So as you see on your right, the ICS manager has many important responsibilities. One of them is to verify eligibility of the members. He's the one who approves the new member. Remember, we're talking about things around size of land. You remember when we were talking about acreage, so he's the one who verify that the farmers have less than 5 hectares to be members of the group of operators. If they have more than 5 hectares, that their annual turnover is not more than, the 25,000 euro we're talking about. All those requirements has been discussing. So it's the ICS manager to do that approval, to do the verification, and then, approve somebody to be a member or not. And all the others, including when we were talking last week around, power production and all those other compliance requirements, it's really him too. Number 2, he's the one to develop ICS procedures to keep the documents and records and ensure they are up to date, including the list of members. That's another key role of the ICS manager. To schedule internal inspections and ensure they are adequately implemented. To be the liaison, he's the contact person between the certification body and the operator or the group of operators, and is the one to ensure and enforce training of ICS inspectors, to assess their competencies and also to see that there is no conflict of interest. He decides on non-compliance and ensures that there are measures to, to ensure that any non-compliances are addressed, and is the one to sign any agreements, e.g. with an exporter. I mean, for some of you ICS managers, when you read this, you'll wonder, oh, this is exactly what I've been doing. So what's different now? What is different is that now these have to actually be written in your JD. So they are no longer casual requirements. These are requirements that you need to carry in your JD as the ICS manager. And as you see bottom left, to do all this role, there's a requirement that the ICS manager should have some seniority, in the organization, so that they can exercise some authority and decision making, especially when it comes to compliance and management of those non-compliances. So I mean, they have the power to tell, to sanction a farmer, to to decide who they will enter into an agreement or not, to really have that level of decision making and independent decision making as is required of somebody to carry out these roles that you see. So, I mean, this is really just to, so at the ICS manager is a key role in the ICS. Very, very important. It's critical. And like we say, like the writing of the regulation says, a well-qualified ICS manager. So meaning this is also when the external auditor comes, they'll check whether the ICS manager has the, is qualified enough to do the role. Yeah. So, when you check on your left, these are the things that we've already talked about. But on your right, you have additional that we think are also important for the ICS manager, especially in blue, for them to do the good role. So they should understand what organic agriculture is and marketing. This is not included in the standard, but they only talk about being well qualified. So if you're dealing with agriculture or organic agriculture for that matter, as an ICS manager, you should know what organic agriculture is or is not. That's why, like we're asking questions last, I think it was the other week, around what is an organic input, and all those, you need to be familiar with the terminology. So you should ideally undergo a basic organic agriculture training, so at least you have the foundations of what organic agriculture is. Ideally, they should speak local language, yes, because they have to, speak to members and the group, but most importantly, they need to speak the language of the certification body. As we mentioned, as you see on your left, they are the ones, they are the primary contact point of the certification body. So you need to be able, if the language is English, then the ICS manager should be able to have good expression of English, both written and spoken, so that they can communicate with the certification body. For some of you, I think most people on the line, you're all coming from Anglophone countries, so probably this is not a big issue. But for the last few months, I've been supporting a cooperative in Ethiopia, and that's when I realized that actually this is a huge issue. I was working with people who are working in this big cooperative, some of them even masters holders. But when it comes to expression in English, it was rather a challenge. They could do some writing, but speaking was rather hard, even for me who was supporting them. So I imagined when it comes to dealing with the certification body, then it would be even more challenging for them. So we really had to do a lot of thinking, how to, manage with that structure. So, and again, what is put at the bottom is, I think, the gist of the matter. So when we think about, okay, can a member of the group of operators be the ICS manager? So long as that one does not jeopardize, the integrity, meaning they don't have the conflict of interest that can, jeopardize everything in terms of approving or sanctioning, all the decisions that they have to make in their role. So if a group of operators has that, strong standing member who, of course, is trusted by all members, can demonstrate independence of decision making and everything, and they have all the other requirements, definitely that person can be the ICS manager. And that will be checked. Obviously, if the ICS manager is also a producer, just like others, then there will be additional, check to make sure that he's actually, taking decisions that are necessary as and when they are required. And I can imagine every time they are doing external inspection, his firm has to be on the list because he can't decide for his own. So that, there will be additional, elements to make sure that actually the integrity is not jeopardized. But I think if that can be guaranteed, then a member can be the ICS manager. So as I mentioned, that all those responsibilities are in the standard. When you check Article 36.1H, exactly, this is the list of responsibilities of the ICS manager. So when you're doing your ICS manual, updating it, and including the job or the roles of the ICS manager, you should basically just cut this and paste it there, because these are the key responsibilities that they have to do. They have to verify eligibility. They have to ensure their written and signed membership contracts, which I'm sure all of you are doing already, even in the old system. They have the ICS procedures and the ICS manual, the list of members, and it's up to date, the tasks and responsibilities of ICS inspectors. They, of course, the liaison with the certification body. They verify the conflict of interest for ICS inspectors. They schedule internal inspections, they do training of internal inspectors, they approve new members, they decide on measures in case of non-compliance, and also decide on any subcontract activities. So all this long list is what ICS managers should do. And as we indicated at the bottom, we should at least have a shorter version in the ICS manager's TOR. So to show that actually we are aware of these requirements and the ICS manager actually, of course, the doing is rather different, but we should capture the whole scope of the responsibilities. So we are talking about key positions. Number one, ICS manager, that is a must. And when an external inspector comes, they will ask, who is the ICS manager? Because that's their primary point of contact. And, that will basically kickstart the whole discussion. The next most important role is the ICS internal inspectors. So the rule is that each group of operators needs to appoint a sufficient number of internal inspectors who are competent to complete organic farm inspections for all members at least once a year. The keyword here is sufficient. Sufficient is not defined in the standard. That depends on the scope, on the product you're handling, on the size of the group, on how geographically spread you are, all that. So that judgment of how many are enough lies with the ICS manager. So you remember we talked about he should be qualified. So if he's qualified, then he can tell that, yes, I need this number to do a fair job. So as you see on your left, the ICS inspector needs to obviously conduct the internal inspections at least once a year. And as a result of when they do the internal inspection, they have to write an inspection report. They need to speak the local language. This one, for the ICS manager, they said it's good if they can speak, but for the internal inspector, it's very important that they speak the language, because when they go to inspect farmers, they need to be able to communicate directly with them. So for the internal inspector, it's a requirement that they speak the same language, and thus they'll be able to speak directly to the farmers. as the ICS manager, they need to understand the principles of organic agriculture, meaning if they are not trained, then the ICS manager should conduct an internal training to raise awareness of what organic agriculture is. Remember, this is some of them are shared. Like, for example, understanding organic, definitely the ICS manager needs to know, and the internal inspectors need to know. They should understand organic production rules and ICS procedures. We say the ICS manager is the one who writes and defines them. Then the ICS should actually know, because they're going to inspect, they're checking the farmer against the rules. So they need to know the rules, to be able to ascertain whether they comply or not. And then they need to, yes, to undergo the annual training. At the bottom, again, very critical, they may not have any conflict of interest. I think I remember we discussed this, was it, I'm trying to forget, maybe last week or the other week, around, for some groups, you can have, you can have the same people who train as internal inspectors, they just swap when the internal inspection comes. Why? Because we don't want people to inspect familiar territory where they may have relations, family or otherwise, which can jeopardize the process of internal inspection. On the right are other good to have, which can also facilitate, again, from experience, that will also help if the internal inspection has those qualities. Obviously, they should be able to write and read. As you saw on the right, we are talking about writing an internal inspection report. So if you can't read and write, then you can't. I mean, that is kind of intuitive. We don't even have to overemphasize it. They are the eyes and ears of the group. So meaning when they are together, the internal inspectors are people who are going to check, on behalf of the group of operators, that members are complying. So really they need to have that attention to detail, to be able to, of course, they know the rules on one side, they understand what organic agriculture is, and then they are able to help, especially the ICS manager, to take the right decisions. And of course, they should understand the farming system, if it's about, farmers are producing shea nuts, then they need to understand, how is shea nut produced? What is the average yield and things like that, so that when farmers tell them, they're able to, tell or confirm whether they are being honest or not. So they should not list the location, the farming system, the type of crop they are dealing with, they know the language, and basically how the whole system around that crop works. That is really good for them to inspect, to be able to inspect those farmers. Again, like I mentioned, ICS inspector is also regulated. So this is an extract right from the regulation itself, that the ICS shall appoint an ICS manager and one or more internal inspectors, may be a member of the group, but the positions can't be occupied by the same people. So you can't be the ICS manager and also your internal inspector. That is a key requirement. They have to be separate. The number of internal inspectors, as we said, has to be adequate and proportional. That is to be determined by the ICS manager, depending on the size of the group, how geographically spread they are, what they do in the production system, all that. For example, when you have some processing activities happening like coffee, then means there are more inspection points to be done. So you need more people to inspect and things like that. So really it's the ICS manager to take that decision. And of course, the ICS inspectors have to be competent to do the job based on the requirements I showed in the previous slide. And who decides that? It is the ICS manager, because he or she is the one who appoints them. And of course, just a repetition I have on the right is that the roles they should do: carry out internal inspections, write a report, should have signed a conflict of interest for each year. They should be trained at least each year and things like that. So all these, as listed, are the things that the external inspector will be checking when they come. Yes, besides the activity they've done of internal inspection, they'll be checking, okay, were you trained? Show me the evidence. Did you sign the conflict of interest form? show me the evidence, things like that, for them to confirm that actually they are the right people to do the job. So the standard talks about those two critical roles, the ICS manager and the internal inspector. Those are regulated. But also, again, you and me who have worked with the ICSs, we know that that's not enough. Just having the ICS manager, internal inspectors is not enough. There are other roles that are important that we need to have a fully functional ICS. So we always have field officers. In some cases, we call them field advisors who do the training for the farmers. Like I mentioned, these can actually also be the internal inspectors, as you see at the bottom, so long as they don't inspect the same groups that they train. So if a group that has, farmers that are geographically spread and, you have different trainers in different locations, so then you can swap them when the time for internal inspection comes. Again, you just have to demonstrate there is no conflict of interest when they are doing the internal inspection. So the field advisors, I think this is really the most common role that we interact with. Their job is to provide the training for the farmers. They have to to be there to advise the farmers, basically. They can also support them in terms of documentation, in terms of estimating yield, all the documentation we need from the farmers. These are the people who do all that. And in most cases, they tend to develop such a very close relationship with the farmers. So when, like you said, when it comes to internal inspection, then we can't use them for the same farmers that they have very good relationship with. So we need to swap them with other people who will now come in as inspectors to check whether the farmers are doing the right job. Another other roles we may have in the ICS, like for example, for most of you, you need the purchase team, the people who are going to pick the quality, the quality of the products that we need, who will ensure farmers are picking it at the right time, they're storing it well, they're putting the right amount. Remember, yield, harvest estimates versus what they deliver, making sure the documentation is done, the labeling and separation where it's needed. That whole team that in most cases should also be distinct because there are specific duties that we need to comply with when we come to the purchasing of products, as we shall see in the procedures for organic purchase. So they also need training, obviously. They need to know ICS, and to know what an organic product is, how should you label it, how do you separate from others, and all those handling procedures that you have in the ICS. We need to train them. And if, especially where you're doing both organic and non-organic, then it becomes even more important because we don't want cross-contamination to happen. And of course, I think this we mentioned before that where you have different purchase or purchase centers, those have to be inspected at least once every year. And of course, internal inspection, you have to inspect everything 100%. So including purchase centers, input storage, and anything that you're using has to be inspected. So in kind of as a summary, these, again, based on experience, this is kind of the scope if you are to ask me a question. So what should be the kind of ideal structure for an ICS to work properly? This is what you see on the screen. We should have an ICS manager. That is not even optional, it's mandatory. Then we should have internal inspectors. We should have field officers under the ICS manager. We should have purchase team headed by a purchase manager or whichever structure you have. Some ICSs have documentation officer to do additional follow-up for all these people below to make sure that they are doing proper, but that's optional. It depends on this, again, the size of the operation and if you need a dedicated person. But if you have well-trained field officers, purchase managers, and everybody, then you don't need a specific person to do documentation. This structure will also be asked. It has to be part of your ICS manual. It talks about what are the roles, who is in the ICS manual, their responsibilities, and again, they will ask for an organogram. How do these people report, relate with each other, who reports to who, and, everything. So you can change, the structure of this organogram, so long as on top of it is the ICS manager. Other things you can play around as you want, but ICS manager has to be the topmost role on that structure. Of course, there is an aspect that we've not been talking about: qualifications, or should they have a degree? Should they have a diploma? All these things. No, they are not specifically regulated, and the standard is so silent about those because it's very hard to standardize across different contexts. But in the description, you can see them coming out. When they talk about somebody who can, write and express themselves very well in a particular language, somebody who has certain competences. So again, it's you to decide. Again, depending on the size of the operation, should my ICS manager be a graduate? Should they have just some basic education? Should they be somebody who has learned on job and have, 10 years plus experience? It doesn't matter so long as they do the job. So qualifications is rather left to you, to the operation to determine. This is a critical and I think it's worth mentioning even before we shall have a procedure coming back to this. But this is one of, and because you also raised the question earlier, is an underlying decision point. As you choose who to appoint for which role, underlying should be conflict of interest. So long as conflict of interest is managed, anybody can occupy, so long as they qualify in all the other aspects, then they can take on the role. So going back to the group of operators, can the purchase manager be a member of the group of operators? Why not? So long as the conflict of interest, is managed, and won't be the integrity won't be jeopardized. So that is a critical underlying factor. And again, who determines conflict of interest? Again, it's the ICS manager, topmost. He's the one to take this decision. So when, as an external inspector, I come and you tell me, oh, these are the list of my internal inspectors, then I'll be looking out. Okay, what could be, how are they related to the farmer they're inspecting? All those pieces that I could see can result into conflict of interest. And it's your job as the ICS manager to prove me wrong, that, wherever I suspect conflict of interest, is not there. It's just my own making. That's why for internal inspector, they need to declare, we need to sign that they don't have any conflict of interest for the farmers they are going to inspect in any particular year. So if they are going to inspect group A this year, they will sign a conflict of interest that they don't have, a conflict of interest form that they don't have any relations whatsoever with that group, so they can make good judgment. And next year, if they are another group, so they don't sign once and it stands for the rest of the time they're working with the group of operators. It's every time they're going to do internal inspection, they have to sign a conflict of interest declaration to confirm that everything is good, then they can go and do the job. Great. I've done a lot of talking. Now it's time to hear from you. Before we go into the procedures, yeah, that's the structure. Those are the key roles that have to be part of the ICS. Not very different from how we've been running ICSs, but still important that we take note. And most importantly, because all these roles now, they are, at least the ICS manager and inspector, they are part of the regulation. So those have to be complied with as they are. Again, emphasizing it's about compliance, not equivalence. So we have to include the TOR or JD, put in those requirements. And when the external inspector comes, they'll be ticking based on those requirements to check whether the ICS manager qualifies or the internal inspectors qualify. But as we said, to do a good job, you need other roles, which are not in the regulation, but we know they're important. And of course, you have to include them in the ICS manual. I'll pause for a moment for any questions around the ICS structure. Any potential challenges you see with these definitions? Happy to take this moment to answer them. Looking at the chart, I don't see any question.
Hello?
Yes, Edward.
Yes, I was wondering,
Yes.
we've looked too much on the group of operators and before the new regulation, the people with the 5 hectares and more were involved. How does this cater for this type of people? How is their, can I also call it ICS? How is it going to look? Because we too much concentrated on this group of operator, but there were these other people who are organic but already they had their big production and nothing is mentioned about how they are going to operate. That's my, in the new structure, that's my question. Thank you.
No, it's a great question, and thanks for asking. Something to confirm here is that we're talking ICS is for groups. So that I think we need to confirm that here we are focusing on the group of operators because ICS is a system that we only apply with groups. It's not for individual operators like the large farms or even companies like yourselves are going to operate. So all these requirements you're talking about are for groups. But however much we are a little silent on the individual operators, some of the things are important. Even as an individual operator, you need to have, you know, a system in place, you know, for you to manage, you know, your operation. For example, if we say in the new establishment, Bio-Uganda will have its farm, they will have processing, and then they will have trading, you know, as 3 critical activities that you do as a company. Definitely, one of them, whenever you have an operation come, you have to describe it. You know, that goes without saying, you know. For example, if you are farming, how do you do it and where do you do it and all that? So you need to have a description. We will not call it an ICS manual, but wherever you keep it, either in, you know, in your office or whatever, of how you do your farming activities, because when an external inspector comes, they'll check that. If you're doing processing, how you do the processing. If you do trading, how you do the processing. So always you should, for any activity you're doing, you should be asking yourself those, normally the 5 questions we say. What are you doing? Why? Normally, in some cases, you can, you know, add a little bit of that. Where, when, and how. For any inspection or auditing, those are the 5 questions we ask for any activity that you're doing. So you should have a description of those 3 main activities, and you know, under those 5 areas. So I should know who does what, when do they do it, and what record. You know, you should have also, you know, a record as evidence of everything that you've told me that you do. So after I know who does it, when, blah, blah, then I need to know. Okay, because I'm not there all the time when they're doing it, then I need to have a record. So they need to keep records, they need to do all that. We don't call it an ICS, but it's the same principle. We need to document everything we are doing. We need to have documentary evidence. We need to have qualified people doing the job, everything else. So you can just basically translate much of what I'm talking about to your individual operation, and don't call it as, but just document it in some shape or form, and you'll be good to go.
I have a question.
Also, sorry, before Miriam, this course is actually designed for ICS.
Yeah.
So it's not designed for individual farms. That's why we've not been talking about individual farms. And because Khaled is going to watch the recording, the contract is for those who have ICS systems to be able to get through them. So probably there will be another training for individual big farms around. I don't know yet, but like Brian said, it's almost the same thing. It's just few things that are different. So we have a question also in the chat for you, Brian. And Koma is raising her hand, and Mirandrin can ask a question.
Okay, maybe let me start with Sage in the chat. Is there a maximum number of farmers have to be controlled by an ICS inspector? No, that's not regulated. The regulation doesn't say how many, because there are so many variables involved in doing that. Like I said, it depends on the number of farmers you're dealing with, how geographically spread they are, how many operations they're involved in on the farm. So really, it's the ICS manager to determine how many internal inspectors they will need to do a good job. I've seen some ICSs where they work with fewer internal inspectors, but rather their work is spread across the year. So meaning, for example, if you have 5 or more production sites, and then maybe, or let's talk maybe 4, one is internal inspected in the first quarter, another one is internal inspected in the second quarter, another one in the third quarter. So like you don't clamp all the internal inspections under the same time period. Then you can work with a smaller number, because all you need is just to spread their work across the year. You don't have to always internally inspect them around the same time. But also that also will depend on the type of product you're dealing with. Maybe if you're dealing with more seasonal, like vegetables and fruits that happen multiple times in the year, then that method will work for you. But if you are dealing with, for example, coffee, which is, in some cases, they do have one main season in the year, in other places they have 2. So depending on how your risk analysis, where you determine whether to harvest to inspect before harvest or after harvest, then that limits you on the number of people you need to have. So for example, if harvesting is happening only in 1 month and you need all your inspections to happen in that 1 month, then you need more people to do the job. So that again, you need to have a competent ICS manager to be able to take those decisions, which is the critical point in the year that I need to do the internal inspection. For example, if you're doing shea nut, I would imagine that the best time to do the internal inspection is as close as possible to the harvest time, because it's wild collection. Then you need to really go at a time when things are likely to go wrong, so to speak, is when you want to do the internal inspection. So if that is time bound and maybe it happens 1 month in a year, then you want all your internal inspection to happen at that time. Then you need to get a bigger team of internal inspectors to be able to complete it before the harvesting is done. But if you're dealing, I can't even find which other crops, but it's really the ICS manager to do. And that when to do the internal inspection is based on the risk assessment. When is it the critical time? For my colleague, Edward, who does pineapples, probably the best time is, again, also before harvest, or at a time when, when farmers are likely to intercrop, because I think in your discussion, you say that the biggest risk is when farmers intercrop with non-organic other crops. So you go around that time to do your internal inspection. And so again, do the judgment. Does it make sense to work with 2 people, or I need 5 to be able to do a good job? That's how open it is. Sorry for using so many words, but I hope it's clearer now. And sorry. Please go with the question.
Thank you. In module 1, I remember planning something like the company or the processor could still operate the ICS on behalf of the GOO to ensure continued quality, as long as the GOO appoints the ICS manager and the ICS inspectors. So if the GOO appoints the ICS manager and inspectors of the processor, then does it mean now that this team can come up with the ICS manual? They have to come up with the appointment letters, and maybe the ICS manager has to ensure all the trainings. Can they do this independent of the GO, or it's the GO who's supposed to do that? There's that point that I'm not getting.
No, it's a good question. It's a bit of a it's gonna be a bit challenging, as we all recognize, for new GOs to do these things on their own. It's gonna be very challenging, and we all appreciate that. Even the EU recognizes that. That's why they leave a little window for the companies or the traders to still be involved. But the responsibility remains with the GO. So when you say appointing, it's the GO to appoint. It's the GO to write a contract with that ICS manager, with those internal inspectors. But the company in the early phases can actually delegate their ICS manager. Like I think we're talking to Gloria. Gloria can be a delegate from the company to go and manage support the group to manage their ICS, meaning that they may be remunerated directly by the company, but under a mutual agreement. You know, there has to be an agreement between the GO and the company, which also highlights these terms of engagement, including the delegation of the ICS manager. So in other words, it's their responsibility as the GO to do everything else we've talked about. But because they still have less capacity to do it on their own, they can work with the company under agreed terms to help them to, you know, to achieve compliance. Does that answer your question?
Yes, but also, so something like the ICS manual, will the ICS manager have to create it with the approval of the GO or the company?
With the GO. It's the ICS manual of the GO. So the company shouldn't, at that point, there's no interest for it. You know, it's for the GO. So if we are to write the ICS manual, it's for the GO, and it will have the name of the GO, not the name of the company. So it will be whatever ABCD cooperative. That's the ICS manual of ABCD cooperative. And they will define the ICS structure and everything. So the company is only coming in to give a little support. And I think, again, the certification body to say the last word on this, but I think it will be time bound. So maybe in the first year of certification, they will allow to have a little bit of involvement, but maybe 2 or 3 years down the road, they will expect that the group of operators is able to do most of the things on its own.
Thank you.
Because otherwise, if that is not controlled, then it will be like an extension of the current status. Because if the company is still doing things as before, then the whole element of empowerment, of ownership, of having the farmers to run, you know, the whole process will be lost because there's no capacity built. You know, it's the same company still extending its feelers into, you know, activities of the group.
Hello, Brian. There's another question in the group chat, but commas that has been raised. But I think another thing I would like to say is that we begin to see the GO as an institution and not just group of farmers.
Yeah.
If we begin to see them as a company on their own, which they are going to be right now, I mean, but if we begin to think that way, it's going to help us a lot in adjusting to this new trend. Yeah. So begin to see the group of operators as a company entity on its own. So a company and a company is going to be interacting and not farmers to a company. So it's a company to a company that will be interacting on the long term. Yeah.
Because yes, remember they have to be legal entities. So for anything that the company wants to do for the GO has to be under contractual agreement. So we write an agreement we're gonna do this, you're gonna support me here, these are the terms, this, things like that. So it's a legal entity. It's not going to be the same as it is now, that they are seen as farmers, they don't know what they're doing, so we can, take on everything. No, it will be rather differently. And even when it comes to, those agreements will specify how farmers are paid, and price negotiation, everything. Remember, the farmers now have their own certificate. Tomorrow they can wake up and think that you're not giving them a good deal, and they'll sell to somebody else because they have their own certificate. You get what I mean? So it's really they are being empowered really to be able to take certain decisions. Yes, Kolma, I see your hand up.
Yeah, hello. As I'm not working directly with the ICS system, and for me it's difficult to define the differences to the former rules. Is there any document that compares the former rules with the new ones, so you can easily detect where these changes have been made or not? Because for me right now, okay, I try to integrate everything in my knowledge, but I'll be asked where exactly are the changes being made. So for me it would be and certainly also for other people it would be very interesting to have a table where you can easily check where exactly these changes have been made, and what is proposed now, or what is the new rules now for the future. Yeah, thank you.
No, very good. Actually, for you single operators, your attention should be on module 2. What Olaomi took you through last week. In terms of production rules. So any changes in the production rules that we saw last week apply across the board, whether you are in terms of conversion, in terms of inputs that you're using, in terms of separation. All those production rules that we looked at last week, they are the same, whether you are an ICS or an individual operator. So I think that's a good starting point. I mean, we can talk to Khalid if they can, make that very distinct. But I think just going back to that module, pay attention to the rules as we were discussing them last week on Monday and Friday. Those apply across the board. The only, for the ICS, I think what's unique for the ICS is this today's session we are talking about. But of course, when you go to the procedures are actually the same. They may not be very different as well, but maybe module 1, because we are talking about size of farm, number of farmers and things like that, which obviously apply to an ICS. But part 1 of today's presentation is also specific to ICS. But when we go to the procedures are the same. Whether you are an individual operator, you also need to demonstrate how you separate organic from non-organic, how you keep your records, how you do your training of people. All the procedures actually don't change when it comes to single operators. So, but what you need to know that these procedures are now are regulated, so they will ask for them as well. Maybe as Olaomi mentioned, when we were designing this training material, it was focused on ICS, and I think even when they were advertising, it was really for ICS. But we can talk to Khalid. Maybe they can make a simpler version of this training, which really targets the individual operators. But I see a lot of similarities. There's a lot you benefit even when you're not running an ICS from this training already.
Brian, just to come in, sorry. And I think another way of anyone could go in to look at the old regulation. And so if you pick the old regulation and you pick the new regulation and read through it, if you have time to go through, I mean, those sessions that are particular to you, you will see the difference in between the old procedure and the new regulation procedures and everything. So you can be able to match it, because like Brian said, we need to tell colleagues to do this. We don't know if they will be able to do it or not, and things like that. So that's another way to get this information, even by ourselves.
Yeah. But like I said, there's a lot of similarity. I mean, I'm not saying similarity between this new regulation and the old. Obviously, there is, but I'm talking about similarity between the ICS requirements and the individual operators. When it comes to procedures, when it comes to production rules, they are the same. So that's already good to keep in mind. I say a message from George. What could be the ideal number of internal inspectors for a group of 2,000 members? Is the maximum to be per day by a single still regulated? No. There is no minimum or maximum. Of course, the minimum is one. I think that's what the regulation says. There has to be one or more. So the minimum is one. You can have as many as you want. There's no upper limit. How many they inspect per day it depends on the context. So that one is not defined. It's you, the ICS manager, to set those limits. Just to confirm that every GO, there is need for an ICS manager too. So for example, if there are 3 GOs, each having a max of 2,000 farmers, there is need exactly. There has to be one per group. So that organogram will apply to each GO exactly. Such a simple question to answer. Just yes, yes, yes. You're saying all the right things. Great. I think so let's try to go through the procedures, and then we can obviously keep taking more questions in the next part of the Q&A. So we are now going into the procedures. We said that, the regulation talks about the structure, the roles and responsibilities, and qualifications, meaning the requirements of those roles, and then talks about the procedures. One of them, these have to be, is actually the responsibility, as we saw, of the ICS manager to document the procedures and to keep them up to date. Number one, registration of farmers and members data. We saw that, it's the ICS manager to verify who is eligible to be a member, to make sure that the membership agreements are signed. The membership agreements are between the GO and the farmer. Again, we are still talking about the GO. The approval of the farmers, new farmers, new plots. I think what we're discussing last week with Edward, talking about farmers acquiring plots as we go. Again, it's the approval of those new plots is the response of the ICS manager. Keeping up to date the members list at least once a year, and of course including the yield estimates. These ones, actually, if you've been operating an old ICS, these ones are not really different from what you've been doing. It's really the same information, but now it's part of the regulation, meaning there is no room to change anything in this procedure. It has to be written as included in the regulation. There has to be a procedure for registration and approval of new farmers. There has to be a procedure for internal inspections. Who does the internal inspection? And again, if you want to know, when we talk about procedures, one of the best ways to check whether your procedure has touched everything or not, use the 5 questions that I talked about. What are we doing? What are we talking about? Is internal inspection. Why? Because it's important. Internal inspection is important to ensure that all farmers are complying with the requirements and blah, blah, blah. When? It has to be done at least once a year. Who has to be, internal inspectors are appointed, mention who the internal inspectors are supposed to be, whether they are field officers or they are specific and how they do it, or they, go to the farmer's field, blah, blah, blah. So that is a complete procedure. So when you talk about a procedure about any of these activities, it has to touch on those 5 things. What the activity is, why are you doing it, who is doing it, when are they doing it, and how they are doing it. This is the best principle of any quality management system. And definitely the same basis that we do, the same, if you have ISO certification, these things should not be strange to you. That's the same principle that we also use for the ICS. When it goes to internal approval and sanctions, exactly the same requirements. When measures to in case when there is a non-compliance, who takes the decision on non-compliance, where is it documented, and all the repercussions that come with that non-compliance, all that has to be also. So there has to be a procedure on management of non-compliances. That's what the regulation is talking about. And we're going to see a little bit of detail of this, but I imagine if you have an ICS, obviously, you know this thing. They are already included in your ICS. The other one regulated, and again, this is a summary that we've talked about before, is the traceability and product flow. How the product moves, the labeling you have to do a product flow, for example, from the farmer until when you sell it, identifying different activities that happen in that product flow, who does all those activities. You need to talk about yield estimate, especially on the lower end of that product flow. You need to talk about purchase centers, if at all they are there, any documentation and labeling that is needed. It's really just to describe the process. We are talking about, procedures. Actually, all these procedures, as we are talking about them, I see them applying even for a single farm, because you're handling a product. So it needs to also have a procedure around the product flow. Before we're talking about, so maybe there's no registration of farmers, but there is an internal approval and how you handle non-compliances. Documentation, there has to be a procedure around documents, which documents are kept within the ICS, who keeps them, where are they stored, how are they updated, all that has to be included, and then records. I hope we understand the difference between a document and a record. So record is the proof that something has happened. A document is just an explanation of the process. So when an activity happens and you write as evidence of that activity happened, then we move to the records. The purchase forms, the receipts, and all those are all the records that we need also to maintain. And in the ICS manual, there has to be all the copies of those and who fills them. And then training of members. As we said, farmers have to be trained on ICS procedure. They have to be trained on organic production rules. Not only farmers, but also when we go to internal inspection, there's also training. They have to be also trained, and other ICS operators, obviously. So the training here in the standard is talking about members of the group of operators, but you'll see training at different levels. So when you talk about, for example, a procedure on traceability and product flow, then you also need to talk about, so how do people know about those procedures? When a newcomer happens, they are trained in this procedure as part of their onboarding so that they are aware if they are going to handle the product. So training is more of a cross-cutting issue, but here in the standard, it specifically points out training of farmers or members of the GO. So let's try to look at them a little bit in detail. We've talked about six, let me go back. 6 procedures that are regulated, but let's look at registration of new, going into a little bit of detail into what is, again, all this is defined in the regulation. So it's a process, for example, to register new members, which will start from the visit and, preliminary information and everything, and ends up with the farmers being trained, So you have to do all this before, now that you prove that the farmer is good to be part of the group of operators, then, you train them in the process after they have all the other eligibility. So preliminary visit, the ICS manager has to confirm, yes, this farmer has the right size of land, is located in the same, more or less, region that we operating. They agree to the conversion period, because some farmers, when they hear that they have to wait 3 years to be members, they may run away. So all that verification of eligibility, the ICS manager who does that. After you confirm that they comply with everything, then they have to sign a membership agreement. They have to undergo a full internal inspection. Then based on the detailed information that comes from the internal inspection, then the ICS manager will approve the farmer and include them on the members list and subsequently inform the certification body. Remember, we talked about approval of new members and updating the members list. The ICS manager does that, and that can be a continuous process during the year. Obviously, when they are joining, they will not sell immediately, so you have to also indicate their status on the members list, that they are in conversion or anything. But remember, when we're discussing again production rules, the member can only start conversion after approval by the certification body. So that's why the ICS manager needs to inform the certification body that we have these new members, and then when the certification body approves, then they start their conversion. And obviously, if you buy both conversion and in conversion, then you need to ensure that how purchase and will be taken and everything, and then training them. So all this has to be written in 1 page, 2 pages, depending on how generous you are with your words. There's no page limit, but you have to describe this process. And it's well written how this process is supposed to be in the regulation. This is something that you all do when you have farmers. Here we are trying to give examples of how the registration happens. This is the examples of forms that you use. There has to be a copy also included in the ICS manual, so that capturing all the farmer details, type of crops. Remember, we said that when we are registering a farmer, we have to register all plots of land managed by that farmer, including rented land. So all that, we need to fill it in this form. The crops that are grown on that farm, on those plots, they are, how they're being managed and all those things. You have to basically capture everything. And like any other document, if it's not signed, then whoever is collecting the information has to sign, and the farmer has to. This is English, but in most cases, it can also be translated into local languages, which again, I'm trying to run through this fast because I'm sure this is not news to all of you. If you've been operating ICS, this is the same, capturing the basic information and making sure that it's kept for each farmer, for all plots. Yeah, verification of eligibility, remember this. So number 1 is this registration, which we have here, number 1. The first visit and collect the basic farm data. This is what you do. This is step 1. Step number 2, the ICS manager has to check, does this farmer qualify to be a member of the group of operators? Number 1, by checking on their land size, after they've collected all the information here, to check whether the land size is below 5 hectares. Remember all those considerations we said everything that the farmer is, all the land that they're using for agriculture has to include and has to be less than 5 hectares, except forest land, which is not being used for any production activities, meaning you're not collecting honey, you're not getting any herbs from it, so that can be excluded. But everything else should be less than 5 hectares. If they fail on the acreage, then we go to the turnover, which is 25,000 euro equivalent in local currency. And then checking that they are not registered into any other group of operators for the same crop. You remember that's another eligibility requirement. No member can register in more than one group of operators for the same crop. That is another requirement we've been talking about. Confirming the geographical proximity. And then, of course, if your group is already 1,999, then you can only admit 1 member. If you're still below, then you have more room to admit more members. So these are the things that the ICS manager will have to check internally to see that this farmer qualifies. If I may ask members, again, not to be sure that I'm not talking to myself, who collects this information in our structure that we defined? You remember, we talked about the ICS structure. Who should be the person doing this job of farmer registration? Who is the one that will bring the information to the ICS manager? Allow me, help me by if anybody, you can drop it in the chat, just to be sure we're moving together. Or you can go off mute and tell me. Who does this job?
The ICS inspectors.
Do we agree? Remember our cycle?
Yes.
I see somebody has put in the chat. The inspectors. Why am I hesitant? Who has? I know it's
I think, Brian, if you look at step 1 there.
Exactly. Somebody has put the right answer.
So the preliminary field visit. So this could be done by the field officers.
Thank you. Exactly.
Give they get the map and all that before the inspection is done in step 4.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because remember, we are talking about somebody doing the field maps, all that field history, and that's not for the internal inspectors. Don't go and do maps and do all that. No. Theirs is a little, if I may say, a little simpler. It's the field officer who does all these things, or trainers or advisors, whichever language you call them. They are the ones who go and collect all this information from the farmer. They are basically collecting as much as they can and bringing it to the ICS manager to be able to take the right decision. So they will, get all this, understand the field history, where they're located, everything they can gather. Of course, what I put in this picture, the form is simplistic. In some cases, you have a more detailed one than this, but really they are collecting. That's why they are putting the cows, everything, everything that they see on the farm, they will include and then take it to the ICS manager, to be able to verify that this farmer fit, to be a member. If they agree that yes, the farmer, is all good, they can be members, then we now sign an agreement with them. The internal inspector will come. We only do internal inspection of members. If you're not yet a member, why are we internally inspecting? We have not even checked your eligibility to be even a member of the group, and we're already doing internal inspection of you? No. We have to go through all this to see you can be a member, and then we do. So we do the membership agreement, as we said. The ICS manager is the one who ensures. So if the farmer complies, then they have to write that agreement between the group of operators and that member or that farmer, where the farmer is committing themselves to do certain things, to comply with organic production rules, to participate in the ICS, and comply with the procedures, to allow the internal inspectors and the external inspectors to visit their farm, to be around, basically all I'm sure most of you have those membership agreements, to include all that. Ideally, these are written in local language for easy, again, for the obvious reason that the farmers need to understand what they are signing, and they need to understand what they are committing to. So there may be other obligations depending on what product you're dealing with in terms of pricing. Some membership agreements may even mention price or contributions towards field extension or whatever it is. So really, so long as the organic commitments are done, you can add more other things which you may want the members to comply with. Remember, this time around, this membership agreement is very important. The group of operators is a legal entity, so they may have more requirements for you to remain, which are statutory based on the laws of the country where they are registered. So, for example, some countries cooperatives are required to do certain things. For example, you have a certain number of meetings you need to attend in a year or something like that, or certain contributions you need to make. So those can still be part of the membership agreement. It doesn't have to be very on a focus on organic requirements, but it can include other aspects that the group of operators wants the members to be aware of, but also to comply with.
There's a question in the chat.
Okay, sorry, I missed that. Can't field officers be? Yes, they can. Yes, Serge, exactly. We said they can. I think here what we're trying to do was more of I was trying to separate the functions. Yeah, but like we said, yes. For example, if you do the collection of all the data in step 1 that we did, then you can't be the internal inspector in was it step 3 or step 4? So we have to get somebody else to do the role. So you can't do this, you can't be the same person doing those activities at different times. Yeah, so they can be, but they inspect farmers who are not there, the ones they advise. I think that's the simple way of putting it. So yeah, you wear different hats. If in village A I'm an internal inspector, then in village B I'll be the field. So I can't be, yeah, for the same. Okay. Are we together on that? So sorry. Yes, we were talking about the membership agreement. Then another critical one, which Olaomi covered last week, is the issue of determination of conversion. The conversion and because like I mentioned, after the ICS manager has determined that this farmer can be part of the group of operators, they've signed an agreement including all requirements. Now they are in stage, which was our stage, I think, let me go back, stage 4 or something, where they're going to communicate to, yeah, we said, okay, they sign, they do the full internal inspection, then they have to approve and update the members list. As they're updating the membership list, they have to include the conversion status of that farmer. And they will communicate that to the certification body so that, you know, the start of conversion can begin. So that is a critical step. So at that point, if there is any retroactive recognition required or being requested by the farmer, given their history and all arguments they've made, again, they have to communicate that at the same time when they're informing the certification body that we have this new farmer. At the same time, the farmer is requesting for a retroactive recognition of conversion. And obviously, the certification body will ask a number of questions. They will ask for maps, for location, for records. What are they growing? You know, how was the land before in the last 3 years? You know, they ask all the questions, and then they will approve or not approve, depending again on their decision. This will be for new farmers, but also for new plots. They will ask the same, because you can be an organic farmer, but in the, you know, you acquire a new plot. Maybe you've bought it or you've leased it. It's still the same process. When you register it, remember, it's going to increase the size of the farm, the size of land holding of that farmer. So meaning there, you still need to update that on the membership, on the members list, and communicate to the certification body. And obviously, for that case, it will be a question of updating their registration form with the additional maps for that new plot, and what crops they are growing or they've been growing before. And then, yeah, if again certification body allows, they can already buy from that plot. But if not, then you have to, again, which should be in your procedure, how you separate the organic and the conversion one. I think the easier way, most cases, from, you know, most operators I've seen, they only deal with organic sowing. They will have to wait, which is the easiest way. Before it's organic, we don't deal with it. Wait for it until, you know, the land is organic, then we start. So which simplifies. Otherwise, dealing with dual qualities is always problematic, especially for small farmers. But that's a decision for the ICS manager. If they have good controls in place, why not? The regulation allows. Yes, we said after the conversion status is approved, then we have to update our membership list, which I'm sure you all know, but now the standard also talks about what should be in the list of farmers. So in other words, now it's more standardizing. Certain information that has to be included. I've seen different operators have been presenting it differently, but now the standard, like we said, it's about compliance. So this time round, the external inspector will come and see whether your farmer's list has this type of information: the name of the farmer, their code, their contact details, their date of registration, total surface area they are holding, and whether it's organic or so. You have to put 2 columns on the land: what is organic, what's in conversion. Then for each unit, you have to know the size, the location, and of course a map has to be available when we need it on the registration form, the products, and when the conversion period began, and of course the yield estimate for each plot, which we total up, and then we know the total yield estimate for the farmer, but the yield estimate has to be per plot. Date of last internal inspection, date of last external inspection, and also this date and version of the list. So every time you update the membership list, you have to track which version is it from when you started, which is a good procedure as well. So every time you change anything, then the version changes, and it's a good way to track which version you're dealing with. They say the list of farmers must be updated at least before external control or sanction. So it's ideally it should be whenever need arises. Whenever anything changes, you update the list of farmers and send to the CB. That's the simple rule. Yield estimate. This is another thing that is done by the field officers, verified by the internal inspection, and approved by the ICS manager. So you should have a procedure of how the yield estimate is done for each member. Why do we do it? Like I said, the procedure should say why do we do it, who does it, and when, and who confirms or approves it. That's what you have on your left-hand side of the screen. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, then we have some example of how to compute it, which in most cases varies again, depending on the crop you're dealing. Some crops are better estimated by the acreage, so the size of the land. For example, if you're doing pineapples, it's better to estimate how much area is covered by pineapples. If you're dealing with tree crops like mangoes or whatever, or oranges, then it's better to estimate by tree, because in a given area, it's easier to establish the number of trees, and you know how much production comes from a tree, and then you can estimate based on that. And so you can use historical knowledge, you can use secondary literature. Again, it's all the external inspector will definitely tell you to prove. So if you say that a tree of oranges gives you 10 tons per year, then he will ask you questions, how do you come to 10 tons? And then you'll have to confirm. Of course, keeping in mind that yield always varies according to the soil type, the farming system, the climate, all those. Like we said, an ICS manager should be qualified enough to, to defend decisions they are taking. So if you use a certain yield estimate per acre, per size of land, or per tree, then you should have basis to defend that. Again, if you've been a certified operator, this has been there anyway. Nothing has changed about it. We always do yield estimates, but now it's written in the regulation. So meaning an external inspector will pay a bit more attention to how you do the process. Internal inspections, again, we need a procedure for internal inspections. how they are done, who does them, when do they do them, all those, like I said, those 5 questions for every. So basic requirements, the ICS must inspect 100% of the farmers. So meaning, it's talking about of the farmers, but of all operations within the ICS. So for example, if you're a group of operators that do coffee, you grow on your farms and then you go and wet process it in a central place. That place is also part of the ICS. So it has to also to be inspected as part of the internal inspection. So farmers and the activity they do. So the stores, the purchase, all that has to be internally inspected 100% every year. And of course, it's all listed. So they have to visit all organic and in conversion plots. They have to interview the farmer. They have to check their records. They have to check the yield estimate. They have to check the post-harvest, which I've been talking about, the use and storage of inputs, but also outputs, and also, of course, the risks and everything else. So basically, like we mentioned earlier, so the farmer, the field officer can help farmers to do all these things. So when the internal inspector goes, it's really to check how well they did them. That's why the field officer can't be the same person who is doing the internal inspection. You can't inspect your own work. You'll be biased, obviously. So because, as you see in the picture, the field officer is very close to the farmer. They are always working together, helping him with the data, with everything. Then we need some other person to come in who is more independent to check whether these things have been done well. So after everything is done, you've inspected the farmers, the internal inspector has to write a report, which is more of a summary of all their findings. So we have, when they are doing the internal inspection, they have a checklist, which I'm sure you all have, where they are checking different things. And then they bring it all together in a summary report. And this is now part also of the regulations. They write a report. I visited on these dates, I visited my name, I visited, like any structure of a report, I visited so many farmers in this location, I covered them within these dates. These are the issues I found, the non-compliances or risks. Sometimes they are not non-compliance, but risks that you see as you are inspecting the farmers. And then, on that report, attach all the inspection forms. Obviously, if you find any major non-compliances, you have to report them to the ICS manager for additional for follow-up action. All that has to be part of the procedure. So there has to be a statement, a paragraph that also talks about what is included in the internal inspection report. I think I saw somebody put something in the chat. In case of serious non-conformity, what are these serious non-conformities? Oh, I mean, any violation of the things we talked about last week, the production rules. For example, a serious one is where we have a farmer who is mixing organic and non-organic produce. Where we have a farmer who has overestimated yield. So for example, we go to the farm and what we see, they can barely produce a ton per year. And in the documents, there is 5 tons from the farmer. That's a non-compliance, a serious non-compliance. Where they are using non-required or non-approved inputs. They are sourcing things which are not approved, which are even not known by the ICS, later on by the certification body, and they're using it on the farm. That is a serious non-compliance. I mean, anything that violates the production rules that we discussed last week is a serious non-compliance. I think that's the better way to summarize it. They're using planting material, which was sourced from non-organic sources, and the ICS is not aware. All those can constitute serious non-compliance. Of course, as the ICS manager, and I think let me see, maybe it's the next, or maybe not. Let me see. Yeah, maybe here. We talked about procedures. Sorry, let me take you back when we were talking about when we're talking about internal approval and sanction procedure. So you have to do a risk map. You know, what could go wrong? Number one, a farmer can buy from neighboring farm. Then you put the mitigation measure. So you really have to preempt all the potential non-compliances and then put mitigation mechanisms along that in the procedure, you know. So this is the mitigation, and these are the actions we do when the farmer is found to have done those. So do you delete them from the group? Do you put them back under conversion? You know, what do you do when farmers do those non-compliance? So that has to be, to a large extent, has to be identified with their respective mitigation measures, but also actions in the event that a farmer, you know, meaning the sanctions in the event that the farmer violates those pieces. Once a field officer can't inspect himself, but can they inspect each other to avoid conflict of interest? Prosper, can you clarify your question? I don't think I get it.
Hello. Yes,
Yeah.
Mr. Brian.
Yes.
In case we have internal inspectors, maybe 4 of them, and they are operating on maybe a field officer has a zone that he's entitled to work on, maybe communities, and another field officer also has a different community, a different cluster zone. In terms of internal inspection, in case can one go to another field officer, a different field officer move to another field officer's zone to inspect or do the internal inspection, while the other one also comes the other side and also internal inspect?
Yes. Okay. It is possible. It just has to be written in your procedure for internal inspections. That's the procedure you follow. That when it comes to internal inspections, field officers swap their clusters. And so long as, so that is one, it has to be written in the internal inspection procedure. But secondly, they have to be trained, because when you're doing internal inspection role, it's different from a field officer role. So there has to be proof that they were trained before they do the internal inspection, and obviously by swapping means they are internally inspecting people that they don't advise. But it's allowed.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we talk about risk-based internal inspections, which can also be part of the internal inspection procedure. Actually, this is the rule that internal inspection should be risk-based. Risk-based means that, first of all, it's the timing. You time the internal inspections at the point of the season when it is most risky, when farmers are likely to either use unallowed inputs, or they are most likely to, you know, buy from outside the ICS, you know, according to your, you know, risk assessment. When is it the critical time that, you know, things can go wrong? So that should be the time that you should do your internal inspection. For example, I see it's in that picture. This is a cotton garden. For cotton, it's mostly at the stage of pest control, you know, because cotton is very susceptible to a lot of pests. So that is the, you know, that's the point when internal inspection should happen, because that's the most risky part of the process. So that's part one of the risk-based. But also when you go to the farm, also, which should be part of the training of the internal inspectors, the way they approach the internal inspection on the farm should also be risk-based. So when you go to somebody's farm, depending on the crop they are producing, where can things go wrong? You know, is it in terms of storage where they store things? The risk is they can store, you know, the organic product with unallowed inputs? Is it in the field? Is it in transportation? Is, you know, where is the, so that risk approach follows not only on the timing, but also on the spots, you know, like you only check where you think things are likely to be wrong. The risk, that's the risk-based approach. So you are really being you don't just go and spend time on everything on the farm, but rather you focus on, for example, if you go in a Ugandan situation where you know that farmers don't really use a lot of pesticides on pineapples, the risk is rather from other crops that they grow. Then your attention should be on those other crops than the pineapple itself, even if the pineapple is the sold organic product. So that's really what we mean by but also, you know, you can do other things, like, for example, do it at different times, you know, again, depending on the crop. Sometimes when you go, you know, they are used that you come in January, then another time you do it in February, or you do it in December, you know, you try to be unpredictable. So farmers also don't stage manage, you know, and, you know, prepare for you. Sometimes do it unannounced, you know, let the internal inspector go when the farmer does not expect it. Vary it, you know, different times of the year, you know, and all those things. That's all the whole risk approach. But obviously, that has to be included in your internal inspection procedure. And we have ideas there. You can say 20% before the rain, or 60% after harvest, 20%, you know, you can really stagger it around depending on what, you know, what makes sense. On the right, we are saying everyone 100%. It should be done before harvest, like this is like general guidance, broad guidance. Why it is important to do it before harvest? Because then you can have more accurate yield estimates. Sometimes if you do your internal inspection as planting, it is really, we know there is a lot that goes before a crop is harvested. So if you do it at planting time, you may not be able to do a good yield estimate. But if you go maybe after they've fruited, then you can be more, you know, honest around your yield estimate. And obviously, define the critical points. When you're dealing with annual crops, herbs, vegetables, then you need to do internal inspections more frequently because these are short-term crops, and you need to be sure that you're capturing the most important info. So meaning for some, you may divide so maybe 50% you do them in one season because they are planting maybe 2 seasons or 3 seasons. So you stagger it so that you make sure that farmers are not, yeah, they are inspected and they're doing everything right. Gloria is saying this is possible. Am I missing a discussion? Okay, no, you are responding to, okay, good. Sorry. Yes, internal inspection report. I think that I've already mentioned what has to be included, you know, yeah, like any other, and this is regulated again. So when an external inspector come and they find your report is not up to standard, that could also be a source of non-compliance, because as we said, it's about compliance. Sample internal inspection have to be signed. So this is an example of an internal inspection form. You see, it's less detailed than the farm registration form. This is just an example where, you know, you're basically saying things are good or not good and just put in some comments. So the contract is there, yes or no? You know, chemical usage, yes or no? You know, you're basically just ticking off those important points and doing the yield estimate, and rather simplistic as compared to the farmer registration form that we saw earlier on. Training, very important, as I mentioned, for internal inspectors. Even if you swap them as field officers, training for internal inspectors is regulated. There has to be proof that they've been trained, and it is an annual exercise. The ICS manager has to organize every year that internal inspectors are trained on the organic production rules, on the ICS rules and procedures, on the inspection technique itself, and of course on how to manage conflict of interest. This you can do it internally if you're a good ICS manager and you know everything, or you can subcontract it. If you're a member of ZOPA, then somebody from ZOPA can come and train your group. It doesn't matter that you do it internally, so long as there is record of training and of course content. So we
Fine, there's a question on the chat.
okay, sorry, I think I wasn't. Brian, can you elaborate more on the inspection report? I think it was before slide 3.3. Okay. Let me try. It's this one. I don't even know who asked the question. Evelyn. Can you hear me, Evelyn? I think in terms of what has to be included. Evelyn, can you hear me? Sorry. I don't know what's happening to my
before the sample.
Before the sample. So that should be this.
Oh, yeah, it should be this.
So again, there is no template per se for a report, but internal inspection report, but just like any report about an activity that has happened, it is a requirement that when internal inspectors go and do the job, they have to write the report. So for example, if you have 5 internal inspectors, each one doing their part, each one is supposed to write a report of what they've done. Who have they visited? What were the observations? It's not that now it come and put, of course, depending on how you're structured, you can, of course, bring them as the 5 and they do it together. But the whole idea is, as we all know it, you do the activity, you write the report about the activity. So the requirement is they have to write a report, which details who. So Brian, I did the internal. I mean, it has to be signed by me because I did the internal inspection. Have to include all the farmers I visited, within which dates, and my findings. So you can have dates, locations, number of farmers visited, and then down you just put observations, recommendations, and things like that. So basically just a summary for somebody who doesn't have time to look at all the 500 farmers that you visited, but they can at least see a summary of your findings. As you see listed here, it's very important to have the name of the person who visited, which places they visited, the dates, and the findings. Even the audit scope is what did they do, really, what did they cover in that scope, and their findings, really. Findings, I think, is a critical part here, because the ICS manager will now use that to go to the next step, which are going to, when they have to do some sanction or any actions after the internal inspection. Also, when they have to update the farmers list, they rely on this inspection report. So long as it covers this, which is included in the regulation, that's okay. So you can structure it in many different ways, but so long as it shows who did it, when they did it, where they did it, what they did, meaning the findings and whatever, and of course how is, what did they cover? They went to the farms, they went to their washing station, if at all they are there, or purchase centers and things like that. So really a whole summary of what they did. And I see I have comments. Okay, you are basically confirming. Okay, great. Yeah. Yeah. this is what we mean. So this is another procedure, very, very critical. And that comes from, so when they do the internal inspection reports, then the ICS manager will look at them and be able to take some of these sanctions. So when you see step 1 of the internal approval and sanction, it's about non-compliance identified during the internal inspection. Where does he pick it from? From the internal inspection report. Because the internal inspection report will talk about which farmers we have visited, which one had issues, and what the issues are. So the ICS manager will pick it from there. Step 1, we'll look at the internal inspection report, identify the non-compliances. Then he goes to the other procedure, which I talked about, where you have all the sanctions, the sanction measures. I talked about the non-compliances, their sanctions, and the actions that are done. So for example, non-compliance is use of unallowed inputs. The sanction is that you have to go back to conversion and, whatever action, whatever, monitoring. Actually, normally sometimes, for most ICS, they have actually an internal sanction and corrective action form. So if a farmer, Brian, is sanctioned, it has been identified in the internal inspection report, then it will go to they will register him in that form. Why do they pick it and put it? Because in that form, it will register details of what they done, but most importantly, it's the follow-up. What will happen, which is our stage 4. So they normally have a separate form, which now will help us to know how we are monitoring that farmer who has been sanctioned. So in other words, they move from the general pool, and in fact, when you update the farmers list, you have a sanction list. So where you put everybody, it's the same list, but rather categorized differently. And normally at the bottom, you put your sanctioned farmers, and what, of course, their status is non-organic, blah, blah, but, updating it on that list. So applying sanction, which is number 2. So you see what they've done, what is the non-compliance, what sanction is needed. They have to enter the conversion period. We have to withdraw them from the group, or we are not marketing their products, or, so basically you see what category they fall in and what sanction they are supposed to get. Then you update the records. You need to update the list of farmers because now their status has changed as a result, depending on the sanction. In number 2, you have to notify the certification body, because for any changes in we have to notify the certification body. And of course, if there is a change in terms of their status, then you have to communicate to the purchase team so that they don't mix the product from those farmers with the rest of the farmers. And of course, which is very critical, is number 4, the follow-up as a result. Because this is what sanction can happen anytime in the year, as it is communicated. It doesn't even have way for the internal inspection. Sometimes the field officers will see the non-compliance. They will see that a farmer has used what is not required. Then at that point, the internal inspector will go and verify, already do the sanction. Update the list, send to the certification body, and of course have follow-up actions. Maybe they need more training. Maybe they need more field visits to make sure that they are now complying, or they need more internal inspection. So all the follow-up actions is what now the external inspector will come and say, okay, everybody, and normally when they are sampling for their annual inspection, they will always include the sanctioned farmers because they want to see whether you are implementing all the, the corrective actions that those farmers should be. For example, if you're not supposed to buy from them, that's what is in your procedure, and then they find that you're buying from them, or accidentally or intentionally, that is again another problem. So really, this is all supposed to be covered in that procedure. The cycle, what happens first, what follows, but most importantly, that the follow-up. That is, I think, the key. The update of the farmers list, the informing the certification body, and the follow-up. All those are very important to take note in that procedure. Yeah, so measures, this is all in this. This is now a copy paste from the standard, that the ICS shall comprise documented procedures on the measures in case of non-compliance detected during internal inspections, including their follow-up. Remember step 4? The ICS manager shall decide on measures in case of non-compliance in line with the ICS measures established by documented procedures in accordance with point G above, which was our step 2. This is a non-compliance, and we've already predetermined. If a farmer does this, this is what the penalty is. And the ICS shall keep records of measures taken, which was our step 4 in case of non-compliances. And these records should include, remember, normally the best way is to have that form. Members subjected to non-compliance, including those suspended, withdrawn, documentation of the non-compliance, and documentation of the follow-up measures for that particular farmer. So for every farmer that is non-compliant, they should have their own record of which non-compliance, what are the actions, the corrective, the corrective measures, and what is, the follow-up that is done to ensure that they are doing those corrective actions. And of course, notification. This is also in the regulation. As soon as there is non-compliance, the ICS manager has to inform the certification body or control body, as the regulation. So any suspicion of major or critical non-compliance, any suspension or withdrawal, any prohibition of placing the product on the market, all those they have to inform the ICS manager. In fact, the CB will clarify. The standard talks about minor non-compliance, major non-compliance, and critical non-compliance, and those are going to be defined. Those categories, again, is risk-based, so the certification body will tell you this one is a minor non-compliance, this is a major non-compliance, this is a critical non-compliance. That room has been provided by the CB to develop that catalog, and will have to share with their certified operators. Of course, if it's minor, that means the actions are minor. If it's critical, then that means they are critical actions if a farmer fails. And so this is, I think this should be our last. Okay, there's a training of farmers, but yes, this is another procedure that I talked about, traceability and product flow. Again, Olaomi talked about this last week. The ICS must, detail this process. Flow map, how the product flows, and what happens, who does what. It includes the marketing, the storage, the preparation, the purchasing and collection, all those. If the distribution inputs that are produced by the group and sent to the farmers, all that has to be also recorded. So basically all the purchase and traceability, the labeling, the records that are supposed to be put, all those have to be detailed. Again, this shouldn't be new. For you who are already certified, this has already been existing. Yeah. So yeah, again, more details, what has to be included, purchase centers, you have to write, in most cases, you even give them codes. So we know in your coding system that when a product moves through a particular purchase center is also tracked. That's included in that code. The separation of organic and non-organic if you're handling both. Procedures to prevent commingling, for example, through using different colors of corners or colors of bags or different labelings or different sub-stores within the main store. All those has to be included. Cross-checking yield estimate versus what the farmers are delivering, all that, so that the purchase people actually always have the latest up-to-date yield estimate for each farmer, and the lot system, all that is really measures to ensure that the product is fully and easily traced. So this is all picked right from the standard. The system of internal controls, which is the ICS, shall comply with documented procedures on internal traceability, which shows the origin of the product. In most cases, it's the farmer's code. Some cases, for people even trace by the field. So you find not only the farmer's code, but also the field code, which allows the tracing of the product throughout all stages from production until when it goes to the market. Also, you should have a system of checking, as we mentioned, yield estimates, and all that. And this has to be documented. That's what you have on the right. Quantities, distribution, preparation, all the records that are clear, that if somebody has to trace back and forward, they can see how the product moves. Again, this shouldn't be news if you're already running an ICS, but yeah, that is the requirement. Then the last, I think this should be the last, we've measured on 6 of them as written in the standard. The one of training of farmers, sorry. Yeah, we talked about training in the internal inspection procedure. We also talked about training of internal inspectors, but this one is specific around the farmers to make sure that actually they are aware. Again, even training, we also want to use a risk-based approach. Just like we use a risk-based approach to internal inspection, also training. Why do we say risk-based? Because we want to address things that can potentially compromise the integrity of our product. So all areas where we think farmers require enough knowledge, they will need to be. So don't just train over, just do the same thing, even which farmers know. No, if soil fertility management is the critical point in that particular region, and where maybe farmers can either because the soil is depleted, or because maybe the government gives free subsidized fertilizers and things like that. So you think that could be the risk point. Then when your training should be in how farmers can manage their soil fertility in an organic way so that they are not tempted to violate. So it's really, you're focusing on the most needed part of your system, for farmers to improve their knowledge. So you don't just, so maybe the initial one, general awareness, farmer is new, you can do more broad, but subsequent trainings should be more tailored to the needs. And where do these needs come from? They can come from field officers because they are always with the farmers, but most importantly, they should come from the internal inspection as feedback that goes to the field officers. They are the ones who do this training, not internal inspectors. Oh, sorry. Oh gosh, what's happening to my ego? It's getting tired. Sorry. And of course, records. I think this is the last procedure. I thought it was the other one. Yes, keeping records. As we know, for any quality management system, if you don't have the records, then you've not done the job. So we have the ICS manual, which keeps all these procedures. You can even add more. Here we've talked about a few, but you can add as many procedures as you want. So long as the ones that are included in the regulation are part of those, you can add more. Everything has to be documented in the ICS. So when the external inspector comes, they will first ask for, where is the ICS manual? Where are the procedures? It can be one document or they can be in parts. It doesn't matter so long as you bring it all together in one, maybe folder, which has all those procedures and rules. Then the next thing they will see, okay, if they read that, for example, when you register farmer, there has to be a record, blah, blah, then they will ask for those records and, everything. So the whole procedure around what procedures you have, what records you keep, all that has to be, again, written together in one general guidance that everybody can know which ones you're working with and which records you keep along with the templates, and how often they are updated, because they can't be, you can, if you say that every 2 years we update them, then again, the external inspector will check whether you actually update them or not. So these are the compulsory, oh God, sorry. The compulsory, and these ones are also included in the regulation. So the list of farmers, very important, and we've already talked about what should be in the list of farmers. Signed membership agreements, those are important. Internal inspection reports and their subsequent forms for individual. We say the report is the collection for each internal, but then there are individual forms for each farmer. Non-compliance records, we said when there are any non-compliance comes through, for each of the non-compliant farmers, we need a form where we register the non-compliance, the corrective action, and what was done, the sanction, sorry, and then the corrective action. So the non-compliance, the sanction, and then the corrective action. Annual training records, both for, for ICS inspectors. Conflict of interest statements. Then one which you've not talked so much about is the appointment of ICS manager and ICS inspectors. So the appointment of the ICS manager is done by the group of operators. They are the ones who give them. You remember when somebody asked the question, is it the company, is it the group of operators? It is the group of operators. They will write your appointment letter and your JD, which should include all the roles as we saw them. When it comes to internal inspectors, that's appointed by the ICS manager, along with their conflict of interest statements, which are just above them. Training record of farmers, again, the format is not defined, but who was trained, when, by who, what was the content, simple. And then, of course, we've seen the traceability records for any processing or preparation activities. And then even any agreements. For example, if the group of operators writes an agreement with the company, the external inspector will also want to see that. How can we get the slides for revising? Oh, you'll get them.
The slides are already.
Actually, they're already on the platform, yeah.
Yeah, on the e-learning platform. So you just have to go and download it then.
Download and yes, I think we can have a little discussion, and I'll stop sharing and I hear any questions, comments at this stage. I know we are over time, sorry. Any quick question, comments?
Also, Brian, I would like us to take the last picture. We have a full class today. So please, kindly, before everybody starts disappearing.
Exactly.
Kindly
sorry,
put on your
I didn't look at the time.
Yes, this class, because a lot of questions came in between, and it was.
But we have Friday to discuss all the things, so I'm looking forward. So can we put on our cameras and for allowing me to take her picture? Great.
See, we're waiting for you.
Can you see everybody? Is Prosper on also? I've not.
Prosper is always in and out of the class. It's Cici that I'm waiting for. Cici.
Yes.
Prosper is in today. Peter is there. By Uganda. I can't say Blessing. Is Blessing in class today? Cici, we are waiting.
Everything is acting up on my side.
Okay,
I've switched on. It looks like my thing is. It's turning on, I think.
That's okay. I will take it without. I mean, it's just one person. Okay. So I can also put it on the group page for everybody to see. So it's good to see the faces. Okay, so like Brian said, we are quite far behind our time today. But please, the last assignment is on the e-learning page. Kindly go in there and download your assignment and then fill it up and submit it by horn of before Thursday. And then we will have our debrief session on Friday. And please, on Friday, everybody needs to come to class. Please, you need to come for the session because you have to do your exam right there in the class. So once we finish, you're going to do your exam through the
Very
e-learning.
easy.
Very easy, immediately. And you're going to do your evaluation in the class immediately. So it's not like, okay, we have to be chasing you after and then running that you have not completed it. So please ensure that everybody's on the session and you have a good network to be able to go to the e-learning platform and quickly do your quiz, and then you do your evaluation, and then we'll end the course, even though the conversation has just begun. The conversation has just begun. So thank you very much, and hopefully we'll meet again. And if you still have any question, don't hesitate to send it on the group page, or if you want to send it to Brian, to him alone. Okay.
Or WhatsApp as well. You can use WhatsApp, but we have a whole session on Friday to do this.
So come on Friday with any questions that you need to clarify on, and then we'll have a good session on Friday. Thank you, everyone. And
all right, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you. My video turned on eventually.
Yes, I can
it's
see.
It's good to see you. Finally.
It's good to see you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.